This morning I was just thinking about David, and when David danced before the Lord. There's the song that we sing, and it's when the Spirit of the Lord moves upon my heart, I will dance like David danced. And I always loved the story behind that. It was a worship team that brought this story out, and they were called the Heart of David Worship. I have to go to the beginning. At some point, if you look in the book of 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel, it's the story of the life of Samuel, but more it's the story of the first kings of Israel. And at some point, Samuel has anointed Saul to be the very first king, and he hasn't given up on Saul. But God comes to Samuel and says, "How long are you going to mourn Saul, seeing I have rejected him?" And around there he says, "Come, I've chosen somebody, a man after my own heart." And that's where David gets that tagline, "A man after God's own heart." And if you actually look at, when I judge two people, and I look at Saul and what he did, he disobeyed. On paper, it looks like, man, Saul disobeyed, and the kingdom's taken away. He's used as an example of what not to be. But David, he committed adultery, then he committed murder to cover up that adultery. It's like the justice scales don't seem to be fair. But as you dive in deeper, there's a book that I read when I was younger, and it was called A Tale of Three Kings, Dr. Gene Edwards, and he quotes, "Outward power always unveils inner resources or the lack thereof." And that's been on my mind lately. And just that, I would say adversity always unveils inner resources or the lack thereof. And it really shows you what people are made of. And in that, he talks about Saul and David and the difference between the two. What makes Saul Saul is... What makes Saul the kind of person that you don't want to grow up to be, the kind of leader that you don't want to have to serve, is Saul's all about himself. Saul is filled with pride, and it's all about his kingdom. When David defeats Goliath, they start singing songs, and they say, Saul has slain his thousands, and David has slain his 10,000s. And Saul starts to become jealous of David and starts to hate David and hunts him down like a dog for no reason at all. And David's never done anything but good to Saul. And in fact, in the cave, there's an episode where Saul falls asleep in the cave, and David cuts a piece of his garment and he takes it with him, and then he begins to feel remorse, like, how dare I strike the hand of God's anointed? God has anointed Saul to be king over Israel, and I'm not gonna. How dare I touch the hand, even the hem of his garment? How dare I touch that garment of God's anointed? Because God had placed him in power, and when God's ready, he'll take him down. It's not my place to do that. And I think recently I even posted something on Facebook that was I had learned from that. I love to study the life of David. There's so much depth in it, and I had learned from that, and I use that in my own. Hey, you know what? I'm not going to dishonor the authority that's been placed over me, but I am going to respectfully tell him that there's these boundaries that you can't cross, and that it's unacceptable to cross, which I don't feel like there was ever disrespect, but the point is still being that from there I learned, hey, you honor the authority that God has placed over you. And then so even when Saul was persecuting him, David still could have took his life and did not. Okay, and then we look again at Saul, and it's just pride. You see a lot of pride in Saul's life. And in that book, A Tale of Three Kings, A Study in Brokenness, Dr. Gene Edwards talks about when the kingdom is taken away from David and how David reacts to that. And David says, Absalom, his son, in that time, I need to keep you with me, because I don't want to go into another room and not take you with me. Now I'm talking about when David was king and his son Absalom took the throne away from him. And he does this he stands at the court where people are coming for justice, and he says, "The king can't see you today. Talk to me, tell me what your case is." And as he listens to what their cases are, he says, the king can't see you today, but if I were king, this is what I would do. And there's leaders that are like that, even today. If I was the boss, this is what I would do. Man, the boss, if I was him, here's how I would handle it. And Absalom wins the heart of the people. And from one day to the next, they anoint. Well, they don't anoint. They have a coronation for Absalom, David's son, and they make it, and he takes his father's place as king, and David has to run for his life. It's what do you call it, a coup, when you have one king set up and then another king comes in to take that place. I would say it wasn't unanimous. It was just but it was enough. He had enough political power to do it, and so David runs for his life. And this is the point that I'm trying to make. All that to get to the point. The point is, when the kingdom's taken away from David, David's response is, and this is, I'm quoting here, maybe God is done with me. Maybe God has said that that David's rule has come to an end. Now I'm paraphrasing. And my paraphrase is this: maybe God's done with me. I want what's best for the kingdom. I want whatever God has for the kingdom. Because that's the difference between a David and a Saul. And it's that it's not my kingdom, it's God's kingdom. And there's some evidence to support this. Back to the song. I want to go back to when the Spirit of the Lord moves upon my heart, I will dance like David danced. I think it's not Psalms. 2 Samuel chapter 6 is a story when the Ark of the Covenant, and we're going back to when David is king. David's first king. He defeats the Philistines, and the Ark of the Covenant, he struggles to bring it back in. It's not easy. A lot of adversity happens, but finally it comes in. After all the adversity, the Ark of the Covenant, it represents the glory of God. It was the Ark of the Covenant. If you ever watch Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark, it's talking about that. The Ark of the Covenant is where the Ten Commandments were kept, but the glory of God would be with that Ark of the Covenant. And it was a plague to God's enemies, but it was blessings to those to God's children. Okay, and so when it finally comes back to the city of David, David is so happy. He starts to dance with all his might, with everything he has. And his outer garment comes off, like he's basically in his, let's say for today, he's in like his wife beater, right? And he's dancing with all his heart in his kingdom. And his wife, the King Saul's daughter, looks out of her window and she says, "Look at King David making a fool of himself." And she says, "Will the king of Israel be such a fool in the sight of the people?" And David looks up at her, and again, that's pride. To me, that's pride from her father. But David looks up at her and says, "I'll be more base than this. If you think you haven't seen nothing yet. Like, hey, baby, you ain't seen nothing yet. I'm about to look like an absolute fool. You don't even know. You think I look foolish then? I'm about to just go off. You don't know." And the thing is, according to back to the Heart of David worship, they talked about this. There were a band that I heard that were talking about this scene in 2 Samuel chapter 6, when the Ark of the Covenant comes back. And they're saying in those times, if a new king were to come in, he would take the old king and he would strip him of his outer garment, and he would parade him around the kingdom, and he would shame him. They would be shamed to show everybody that this king that you used to serve, he's nothing. And then whatever new king would come in with glory and splendor and say, "Hey, look, I'm the new king." And according to the Heart of David worship, which is that band, and as they're telling this story, according to them, and it makes sense to me, that's what David is saying symbolically. When the Ark of the Covenant comes to the city of David, coming back to God's people, because the Philistines had control of it. When the Ark of the Covenant, the glory of God, came back, David has stripped his outer garment and has danced so with all his heart before the king, saying, "Hey, this isn't David's kingdom. This is God's kingdom. This doesn't belong to David. This is God's." Maybe, and then he goes back, and I go back to later on when he's been king for years and his son tries to take away the kingdom, he says, "Maybe God is done with me." And that's consistent to me. The difference between a King Saul and a King David is that King David says, "God, it's all yours. It was never mine. It was always yours." And I think of Job, where Job loses everything that's dear to his heart, his children, and he says, "The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." And I just love how David's attitude and everything, because David lost a lot in his lifetime. Even before he became king, the very last The second to the last chapter of 1 Samuel tells the story where David cried, where he had no more power to cry, where he wept, where his men too, David and his men all lost everything, and the Bible says they cried until they had no more power to cry. I've cried until I had no more energy in me to cry. And I love David's songs that he sings before God. He sings in, I don't know the chapter it is, but in Psalms, there's one where he says, I cry out, I sink in the mire, I sink in the deep pit, and I cry out until my voice has no more power to cry. And in that last chapter of 1 Samuel, before David is king, when he's lost everything and his men talk about stoning him, his men are so distraught by him. It's your fault, David. Your leadership has led us to lose everything. And David's lost everything too. But the Bible says that David encouraged himself in the Lord. And there's 9 times in the Bible where it talks about how David inquired of the Lord before he did anything for his next step. Before he went to his next step, he said, I need to ask God, what shall I do? I need direction from God. I need strategy from God. He inquired of God, what shall I do? But before that, he encouraged himself in the Lord, because there was nobody. He had lost his family. He lost all his wives. And there's nobody patting him on the back. It's okay, David. It's going to be good. David encouraged himself in the Lord. And then he inquired of the Lord, Lord, what am I going to do? And I just want to encourage you today that whatever you might be going through, strengthen yourself in the Lord. Encourage yourself in the Lord. I like Psalms 91. It's one of my favorite Psalms of all time. And at the very end, and I'm going to paraphrase here, the very last portion of that song, Psalms, it talks about, it's like God's perspective, because he has known my name, because my child has known my name. And wherever it says he, I like to put in my name. Because Tony has known my name, I will honor Tony. He's going to cry out to me, and I'm going to hear him. I'm going to show him my salvation. I'm going to answer him. With a long life, I'm going to satisfy him. But at the very beginning, Psalms 91, he who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide in the shadow of the Almighty. Where's that secret place? For me, it's where I fall apart, broken before God. God, things didn't always go out the way I expected them to go. God, I've lost this, I've lost that. God, I'm hurting in this part of my life. That secret place that I go to where I just fall apart, and I find him in his word. I find him in worship. I find him in the secret place of the Most High, abiding in the shadow of the Almighty, where God just speaks to me, where I just see in his word how he picks up. How it doesn't just happen to me, it's happened to every prophet, it's happened to David, it's happened to every great man of God, where God just encourages them, God picks them up, and several of them just want to die. They just want to lay down and die and say, Lord, it's finished, can we go home now? Can I just go home now? And that happens to consistently to anybody that I ever read about. And in that place I see God lifting up his people. When I look at Elijah and how he's in a cave, he's called down fire from heaven. Okay, he's prayed and the drought has been taken away, and then bad things happen. He gets a word of discouragement, and he goes to a cave and he just wants to lay down and die. And God sends an angel. God sends provision. God gives him food. God lets him rest, and gives him time to get back up. And the goodness and gracious of God that gives us time, that doesn't kick us while we're down. My sister will be upset, but yesterday she fell. We're running through the airport and she fell. And I'm such a terrible person. I didn't say it at first, but eventually it came out. And I didn't say it meaningly in a meaningful way, but it came out at some point. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. I was like, You wanted to have cute shoes instead of running shoes, all because you want to have cute shoes and running shoes. And it was terrible. It's a terrible thing to say, but I love how God doesn't say that. I love that one meme that says, man, isn't it God so good? help you out of the mess that you make, and He won't hold it against you.